Welcome to episode 417 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Trent here as always. And this week, this is where I say we've got a good one because so-and-so is here, but we've got an okay one because it's just me. Actually had an episode earlier this week with Mitchell Gilliam at Blind Oath, but I wanted to put out another one because it's been a while since I've had one of these episodes where I'm just talking. Most of the episodes in recent months I've kind of kept the talking pre-interview to a minimum and just kind of gotten into the subject at hand. So it's not like there's a backlog of things I'm going to go back and talk about. I just thought I want to throw out an episode with a few random things that are going on. They won't be super timely because by the time this comes out, all this stuff will be a week to 2 weeks and some of it even a month old news. I don't know. I figured the obvious things being Guns N' Roses having been my favorite band since I was a kid. I should talk about the Frank Ferrer leaving the band situation. And then also Dave King of Flogging Molly. Some major news came out about him recently. And then we had Brent Hines leaving Mastodon. You know, that happened earlier this month. And just recently, Dave Mustaine, made some pretty interesting comments about a genre of metal. So I thought, maybe just jump into a few of these things. But first, I need to let you know who sponsors this podcast, and that would be DEB Concerts, a concert promoter based right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They brought tons of great acts to the downtown Tulsa area at both the club level and the arena level. They also book the DEB concert stage at Rocklahoma every year. This year is no exception. The Rocklahoma lineup was announced a while back. You can see the entire lineup at rocklahoma.com. But the DEB concert stage that they book features acts throughout the day on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it also features the pre-party. If you buy the full, it doesn't have to be VIP, full VIP, or GAT ticket as long as you have a 3-day ticket. You can check out the pre-party. This year it will feature Dee Snider as the headliner. He's been on this podcast before. His solo work is excellent. Trickster. 2 members of Trickster have been on this podcast in the past, one of which is PJ Farley, who is a member of Fozzy. There is another major act from the 80s that will be on the lineup that day that has not been announced yet. The rest of the weekend on the DEB concert stage will feature Orianthi. Very cool to be able to get to see her live. Mike Tramp of White Lion has been on this podcast in the past. Dime Store Riot. They've been on the podcast multiple times. Fist of Rage has been on the podcast multiple times. We've also got Van Halen, a Van Halen tribute band. One Night Stand, a great band out of Tulsa. They'll also be out there. Tons of great acts throughout the whole weekend. So like I said, check out rocklahoma.com for ticket info. Check out debconcerts.com for any other info. And of course, we let you know right here at Thunder Underground. And speaking of Rocklahoma, one of our other sponsors is Rocklahoma Bitches. If you've been to Rocklahoma, you're surely familiar with them. But if you have not and you're going, I'll let you know a little bit, which is that if you see the ladies of Rocklahoma Bitches, they've got tons of swag, tons of merchandise, and they give all this stuff away. They don't charge for a single thing, and everybody wants their merchandise. They've got a great logo, a skull and crossbones, doing the metal horns, saying Rocklahoma Bitches, and they've got it plastered on all kinds of stuff. You hit them up or you see them, they'll usually hand you something, which is very cool. They're very charitable, and that plays into the fact that every year they bid on the guitars. Christy from Rocklahoma Bitches always bids on the autographed guitars that Rocklahoma puts up for auction for charity, and she generally always wins at least one. Rocklahoma Bitches, Christy and Kendra, both support nonprofit organizations, and they sponsor Cancer Sucks that happens every year in Tulsa. December, it's usually late November, I believe sometimes it's in December. The point is, Cancer Sucks, sponsored by Rocklahoma Bitches. So if you see Rocklahoma Bitches, yell at them and tell them you love them and you heard about them on Thunder Underground, or you heard their name on Thunder Underground. How about that? I doubt you heard about them here. We've also got Sunset Tattoo, a tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. tattoos are done, get them proper. They're state licensed, they're Native American owned, and they have a female artist on staff full time. If you hit them up by calling them or messaging them, you can set up a time to talk about what work you're looking to have done. Check out all their work through photos, which is very nice to do when it comes to tattoos, on all their social media. Facebook and Instagram is both Sunset Tattoo Tulsa. They specialize in all different styles. I've had multiple tattoos done by Jake. I love them. I know many other people that have as well, and I'm pretty positive that if you hit up Sunset Tattoo, you will be as well. They always accept walk-ins. They're always running specials. So hit up Sunset Tattoo. Tell them you heard about them right here on Thunder Underground. All right, what should we talk about first here? How about, well, let me tell you this. I kind of mentioned up front that Mitchell Gilliam was on an episode of this podcast just a few days ago, episode 416. Blind Oath is one of the bands that is playing 2 Minutes to Tulsa, which happens, if you're listening to this the day it drops, which you're probably not, I realize that, but just in case you are, 2 Minutes to Tulsa happens this Friday and Saturday, the 28th, March 28th, March 29th at the Vanguard in Tulsa. Tons of great bands on this bill. It's a festival that happens in Tulsa. This is the third year that brings in a lot of classic 80s metal, and I'm talking like underground classic 80s metal mixed with current metal in the underground genres like, the classic metal sound, the new wave British heavy metal sound, speed metal, thrash metal, melodic stuff, all different kinds of metal. And some of the bands that'll be on the lineup this year at the Vanguard will include Satan. They've been on there before. Excellent band if you've never heard them from the 80s that have made a comeback in this past decade. We've also got Liege Lord, who is another classic band from the 80s. Lizzie Borden as well. Borden balances that line where they could show up at a heavy metal fest. They can show up at a glam metal fest. They fit right between there. They've got the stage show. They've got everything. Looking forward to that. We've got Hittin' Haunt, who has been on this podcast a couple times. We've got, like I said, Blind Oath. We've got Sacred Rite. We've got Tower Hill, Lady Beast, Savage Master, Tulsa's Own Medicine Horse. Such a great lineup. Check it out, vanguardtulsa.com. Follow 2 Minutes to Tulsa on Facebook. If you're hearing this after the fact, follow 2 Minutes to Tulsa. It happens every late March, early April every year, right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Follow Horton Records. Follow all that great stuff. Follow Blind Oath. Another kind of point of timely interest is that tomorrow as well, on March 28th, in a totally different genre of rock, Phil X and the Drill's newest album comes out. This album is called Pow, Right in the Kisser. Great title for an album. Phil X was recently on this podcast 2 episodes ago. Episode 415. 415, sorry. Phil X is most well known for being the guitarist of Bon Jovi, who took Richie Sambora's place starting in 2011 and then officially in, I believe, 2013 to 2015 time period. He's played on 3 Bon Jovi albums now. He has also done tons of session work with Alice Cooper. He's played on Alice Cooper songs, Andrew W.K.'s classic debut, I Get Wet. Phil X plays all the guitars on that. He has, played for pop stars, played for all different kinds of people. He was a member of Triumph in his early days. Triumph released one album that wasn't the original lineup, and he replaced Rick Emmett on guitar. It's a fantastic album if you're into heavy melodic rock. Phil X and the Drills, though, is I don't know, I like to call him rock and roll, which kind of sounds corny, but it's the best way to describe bands that don't fit a specific genre when they're, they hit that heavier side of rock, but they're not hard, they're not like heavy rock, but, they could fall into the hard rock category, but they've got a real blues-based edge to them. So, I would call them bluesy hard rock, but leaning more towards the melodic side. They got that great power trio feel. They're a band that has been around for, I believe maybe 2002, I think I read, was their kind of when they formed, and their first release was around 2005. So at least 20 years. They've got a few EPs. They've got this full length. They've got a lot of standalone singles. It has been Phil X and Daniel Spree throughout this whole time. And in their early days, the original lineup for that first chunk of music, first couple EPs, included Jeremy Spencer, who was the drummer, original founding member of Five Finger Death Punch. He left Five Finger several years ago. But since then, they started filling in with session drummers on the studio work. And then in the mid-teens or late teens, sometime in the past 10 years, they brought in Brent Fitz to be the drummer. And Brent Fitz, if you've followed rock and roll, you've surely heard his name. He's played with all kinds of people throughout the years, and most notably the last 15 years or so have included him being a member of Slash, featuring Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. So he is officially one of the Conspirators. Who, speaking of Todd Kearns, his rhythm section partner in the Conspirators, has been on this podcast before. So check that one out if you have not. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, Brent Fitz. Phil X and the Drills. So he's been the drummer now for a while, but not in the studio. I believe he's recorded a track or two, but they started using Phil X's wealth of friends and connections he's made throughout the years. Most these guys that are session musicians, of course, start to gain connections that spread far and wide. And when you've been doing it as long as Phil X has, for like 35 years now, you're going to gain quite a bit of friends that can play the drums. Tommy Lee being one of them. He played on several of Tommy's solo works like Tommyland, Methods of Mayhem. I forgot that other Tommy Lee solo album, the name of it. And Tommy Lee, contributes to a track on the new album, and I believe on the EP that came out 6 years ago. Ray Luzier is also on the new album. Tico Torres, of course, a member of Bon Jovi since the beginning, 40 plus years now. He is on a track, and Phil on the episode talks all about the recording and how that track came together. That was kind of, one of the cool things about the Phil X episode, I thought, is I'm not a drummer, but I've got drum heads hanging on my wall. So if you're talking to me on Zoom, you see the drum heads. And of course, that was a point of interest because the album that that comes out tomorrow has like 10 different drummers on it. So of course, we spoke about different ones and how the writing process worked with one or the other, how the recording process went. He told stories about all that. So it's kind of a cool deep dive. He talked a little bit about Vinny Appice and John Tempesta as well, because those were a couple of the drum heads that were hanging on my wall. So if you're a drum fan, Phil X, of course, a virtuoso guitarist, but he talks a lot about the drums. And Brian Tichy is another one that is on the new album that he talks a bit about, and he's been on this podcast a couple of times. It's been quite a while, but one of the times he was on was not long after Neil Peart from Rush had died, and Brian Tichy, like any great drummer, is a massive fan of Neil Peart and was actually part of a Rush tribute band called A Farewell of Kings. And if you're going to be the drummer, or if you're going to be any, let's face it, if you're going to be any musician in a Rush tribute band, you've got to be above the level of good. And you should probably be above the level of great even, especially if you're attempting to play the drums of Rush. But Brian Tichy, I believe, does that with ease. And the episode he was on was actually a tribute to Neil Peart. It's kind of, if I remember right, I don't know, I'm just going on a random tangent here. I don't think that we, I don't think we formed that episode to be a tribute to Neil Peart, but we started talking about Neil Peart because he had died not long before the interview. And it just kind of spiraled into talking tons about that and about his Rush tribute. So it kind of became the Thunder Underground Neil Peart tribute for that time period. Jason was still around. That was a fun one. But hey, there's just some random tangents all over the place. Like I said, this is the first time doing one of these episodes where I'm just talking. But one of the main sources of conversation, I thought I was going to bring up is now about a little over a week old. I believe it was March 19th. Regardless, the date is kind of irrelevant at this point. But last week, the week of St. Patrick's Day, Guns N' Roses, released a statement. It said, thanking Frank Ferrer for his, 19 years of service with the band. They called it an amicable split. Frank, of course, posted the same thing. Thanks for your 19 years. Great service to the band. Frank Ferrer. If you're not familiar, if you're a fan of Guns N' Roses or not a fan, but if you're just one of those people that aren't familiar with the people that came past the classic era lineups, past Matt Sorum, basically. Matt Sorum, of course, wasn't the original drummer. That would be Steven Adler, but even people that don't pay super close attention know Matt Sorum because he was there during the heyday, during a massive era, during the Use Your Illusion times. But since then, it really wasn't that long after. It was maybe a decade after Sorum was out that Frank Ferrer came along. But between there, I believe Sorum was out around 96. I think it was, the Guns N' Roses timeline as Slash, he released the debut album from Slash's Snake Pit. Well, the debut out of the only two he released. Came out in 1995, 30 years ago now. Actually, the anniversary was just a few weeks ago. Fantastic rock album, if you've never heard it, by the way. Eric Dover is the singer, and it's kind of an extension of Guns N' Roses, in my opinion. He doesn't sound exactly like Axl, but he's, of course, in that higher range. And this music sounds like kind of where you would have expected Guns N' Roses to keep going if they stayed on track with their kind of classic sound. I'm not saying this thing sounds like Appetite or anything, but it's Slash, so it's got that feel. But Slash left Guns N' Roses officially not long after that. It was in the 95 to 96 range. And then Matt Sorum, I think, was shortly after that. And then Duff was within a year or so after that. And that's kind of where the last remnants of the original lineup and the subsequent Use Your Illusion lineup kind of filtered out, except for Dizzy. Of course, Dizzy Reed joined between Appetite and Illusion. He was on the Illusion albums. He's been there since 1990, and he's never left. So he's the only member besides Axl that has been pretty consistent since almost the beginning. And then after, all that started happening, Guns N' Roses released Oh My God around 99. It was part of the End of Days soundtrack. And during that, I can't remember who the drums on that was, but I'm pretty sure it was probably Josh Freese, because he was the drummer from 97 to 2000. Then after he left, Brain, of course, of Primus fame, came along, and he was in the band from that point until Frank came along in 2006. So basically the entire era of Guns N' Roses kind of re-debut. You remember like the MTV Awards where Axl showed up with cornrows and kind of that whole period of the band that most people kind of blow off. But it was the Chinese Democracy, that whole period of every year. Is it coming? Is it not coming? It's been 5 years. It's been 8 years. It's been 10 years since an album, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of funny now to think that that was such a talking point in the rock world forever. When's it going to come? And then now, here we are, 16 years past its release. It's just kind of amazing. But now that's another kind of funny thing to say. We're 16 years past that release, and we never got another studio album since. We've got, 3 or 4 songs in the past couple years. But, that's a whole nother episode in itself that I'm not going to get into, because the point is Frank. So Brain recorded that Chinese Democracy stuff. Josh Freese recorded some of it. And then Frank joined the band. And then, of course, since he was in the band, Axl started having him record some stuff. And I believe Frank is on about half of Chinese Democracy. That ended up, half of the tracks that came out include Frank on drums. And then he's been the drummer in the live set ever since. I've seen Guns N' Roses with Frank as the drummer way more than I saw him with anyone else, because, the only other time I saw Guns N' Roses before Frank joined was during the Illusion tour in 1992 when Matt Sorum was the drummer. I'd seen members of Guns N' Roses in their solo projects, but actually seeing Guns N' Roses the next time again wasn't until around 2010. By that point, Frank was the drummer, and he lasted for nearly 20 years. So here we are. When this news came out, of course, immediately, the news narrative between, just like random media sites and, of course, fans and comments are who's going to be the new drummer. And, of course, the bulk of everybody is screaming about Steven Adler and Matt Sorum. And it just kind of cracks me up. This is my favorite band. And, of course, if the band was going to say, hey, we're going to do a show or a tour that includes the original five, Izzy Stradlin and Izzy Stradlin and Steven Adler, I would absolutely think that was great. I would think that was wonderful. If they said, hey, we're going to resurrect a Illusion lineup, we're going to bring in Gilby and Matt Sorum, I would think that was great. But I'm not delusional. I know how this shit works, and especially when you have someone as kind of mysterious as Axl, you don't know what he's thinking or where this comes from. Like, why would a guy like Frank, who I don't know personally, I've never met, but everything you ever hear about this guy is that he's extremely nice dude, very approachable. So, like, why is this dude out after 20 years? Because even though it says amicable, whenever Frank, the following day, after it was announced who his replacement was, released a kind of a statement, like his own personal statement saying, thank you for the 19 years to Axl and the band and all this, and et cetera, et cetera. But then he says, and I quote, disappointment that this chapter came to an end. So that's the kind of line in the statement that leads everyone to believe that it wasn't technically an amicable split and he was replaced. There's a million theories for this if you're a Guns N' Roses fan, as myself, but I'm not going to get into any of that. That's kind of irrelevant to all this right now. Hopefully it's truly amicable, but I don't really think, regardless of whatever the situation is, that if Frank wants to continue on as a touring drummer, that he's going to have an issue finding a gig. I mean, especially when you're in one of the top grossing live bands in the world, and now you're basically a free agent. Again, it shouldn't be hard. And he probably doesn't have to. He could probably take some time if he wanted. Obviously, the man's not making Appetite for Destruction or Use Your Illusion royalties money, but he, as a hired member of one of the biggest bands in the world for 20 years, you would think maybe he's at least made a decent income. So the point is, he could take some time off. He could do whatever he wants. And I kind of jumped from where I was going with that, but where I was originally heading was the fact that people think Steven Adler or Matt Sorum is going to just jump in and replace this guy. You haven't been paying attention if you think Matt Sorum is going to replace this guy. I mean, Matt Sorum, of course, talked tons of shit about Axl throughout the years. And the immediate response to that is, well, so did Slash throughout those years that he wasn't around. But the obvious answer to that is that Guns N' Roses and Axl Rose need Slash. Guns N' Roses doesn't need Matt Sorum. And as much as I love Matt Sorum and wish he was there, if you have Matt Sorum or don't have Matt Sorum, you're going to sell the same amount of tickets in an arena. You're going to sell the same amount of tickets in a football stadium. But if you have Slash or you don't have Slash, that's when your ticket sales are going to fluctuate big time. If it's just Axl Rose and friends like it used to be, if you don't have Slash or Duff around. And then if you followed Matt Sorum's autobiography at all that came out, there was a big deal about his biography before it came out because it was leaked. Who knows whether it was intentionally leaked or whether it was, that's where my mind always goes in situations like this, because it's like it drew a lot of a lot more press around the fact that Matt Sorum was releasing an autobiography than if it hadn't been leaked. So, you kind of think sometimes these things are done intentionally, but the point is the original draft, quote unquote, original draft was leaked, and it was different than what initially or eventually came out. It had stuff in there that wasn't in the finalized book that you can grab now and read, and some of the stuff that was omitted was him talking shit about Slash and Duff. So now you've got a guy that not was just talking shit about Axl, now he's talking shit about the two guys that you would think that he was closer to because, of course, they went into Velvet Revolver, had tons of success and several years with that. And then on the other side of this, you've got Steven Adler, which is the most popular choice for people. And of course, I would love to see Steven Adler. By all accounts, this dude is just a nice dude that, made bad choices. And, but he's continued on to, live his life and do his thing. But the consensus is Guns N' Roses does 2.5 to 3 hour shows. Are they going to change that? Who knows? But if they're doing shows that long and they're going on tour, the majority of anybody believes that Steven Adler would not be able to handle that. That would be great if he did, if he could, if they brought him back. But my guess is, they brought him back for what it was like 3 shows or so in the early days of this reunion with Slash and Duff around 2016 to 2018. He was in there for 2 or 3 shows, and each time he played a couple songs. And I know he, in press after that, he even kind of, can't remember what he said, but I remember it was kind of not talking crap or anything, but it was like he, wished he had been able to do more, which I don't think that would negatively affect anything, but I just think that, people long for nostalgia, and when it comes to music, you can't always expect that. Some of our favorite bands barely have any members, some of them have no members. I mean, just a few random examples of that are Foreigner, In Flames. I mean, In Flames is a loose example, but they, their first album didn't even include the singer that of In Flames. Who else? Quiet Riot. There's, a great list of, not a great list, but there's quite a few bands out there touring that have very little members, and the fact that Guns N' Roses people want to, cry and complain because they've only got 3 of the classic era 5, and it is the 3 that are most notable as a markable entity to an average fan. Not, to me, Izzy Stradlin is the most important piece of Appetite for Destruction. But Izzy Stradlin isn't the most important piece to selling tickets to some rando in Minneapolis whose favorite song is Welcome to the Jungle and knows 7 other Guns N' Roses songs and they're all singles. So I mean that's kind of where we're at, and that's why, as much as we love to discuss this stuff, the drummer in this situation isn't super important to the markability of Guns N' Roses. I'm not saying that to knock Isaac Carpenter in the least. The guy has been around playing drums for a long time, and it plays back into what I said earlier with Frank and with Phil X and everything. Whenever you become known for being a solid, amazing live drummer, lots of different acts throughout the years, and of course when you've got familiarity with a band member, it's kind of a no-brainer. Isaac Carpenter was a member of Duff McKagan's Loaded. Great albums from that band, by the way. If you've never checked those out, check those out. Most recently, he was a member of AWOL Nation for the past decade or so. Recorded, I think I read 3 albums with AWOL Nation. Back in the early days in the 90s, he was in the band Loudermilk. That's one of those bands that I always saw the name in, like, all the rock magazines like Hit Parader and Rip and Circus and etc. But I don't believe I ever listened to him. I don't know. And then I also read yesterday that I believe in his early days, pre-Loudermilk, he was in a Guns N' Roses cover band. So obviously this guy isn't just filling in because it's a gig. This guy had the basis of being a fan, over 30 years ago, starting then, and of course being a band member with one of the founding members of Guns N' Roses and Duff. And then also Duff has done guest spots with AWOL Nation over the past decade since Isaac's been in the band. So apparently these two guys are close and kept in contact. And here we are. I can't really speak on his drumming style or ability of how it fits. There's been a lot of conversations on that with Frank throughout the years. You know, Steven Adler was, known for his kind of punk rock loose style, and Matt Sorum was known for his more technical style. I always thought Frank did a great job of sitting between those kind of styles, so maybe Isaac's the same way, or maybe he leans more towards the Adler side, but regardless, I think it'll surely end up being a good deal for both sides in this situation. So there you go. Okay, so a slightly different subject here is if you're a fan of Flogging Molly, you surely heard this news, but if you're not a fan that follows too closely, you might have missed the fact that, Flogging Molly is a band that is constantly on the road, or at least I feel like they're constantly on the road. I'm always seeing tour dates every year for 2 or 3 different tours. And back in January, they had a tour scheduled, this spring and in the summer, I believe, and they canceled the tour and basically just stated due to a major health concern for frontman Dave King. And that's basically all the info they gave. Everybody, of course, was, hopefully whatever it is comes out great on the other side. Well, then on St. Patrick's Day, I wonder if that was, timed on purpose or it was just the timing just worked out. But of course, with Flogging Molly being a Irish-rooted Celtic punk rock band, it was fitting for this news to come out on St. Patrick's Day for the outpouring of support and love that came back. But his wife, Bridget, who is also a member of Flogging Molly, released a statement basically explaining what was going on and the fact that Dave had a brain hemorrhage. And since that point, he ended up in a coma. He had been through 2, maybe 3 surgeries. And when in the statement she said that she believed that they were finally on the other side of this, and implying that he was starting, on the uphill climb to full recovery. She basically didn't say anything like that or give a timetable, just basically saying hopefully we can see you all again soon. But basically gave, kind of ended it with a hopeful prognosis. So let's hope that all that comes to fruition and, this time in a couple years, we're talking about the new Flogging Molly 2027 tour, or however short or long this takes. Dave King is a great frontman. Flogging Molly is a great live band. They're a great band all around. If you've never followed them or never checked them out, you've surely heard Dropkick Murphys at some point, even if you don't follow them. It's in that same world, but not as aggressive is the best way to put it, I think. That same kind of Irish-rooted punk rock feel, but on the less aggressive side than aggressive music-wise. That's the best way to put that. Dave King also was a part of Fastway. If you're a fan of the old school rock such as myself, he was a singer of Fastway there, so if you remember them, there's some interesting side notes for you. But again, huge shout out to Dave King for a full recovery, and hoping to see him back out there sooner than later. I was going to talk a bit about Brent Hinds leaving Mastodon, but I don't think that I have the correct knowledge, maybe would be the best word. I'm admittedly a late coming fan of Mastodon. I've been a huge fan of metal and even, the genres that they kind of, lean towards, like the psychedelic or the stoner, the groove, all that kind of progressive, all that kind of sounds. But Mastodon, when I heard them early on, I just didn't latch on to them. Didn't dislike it. Just one of those things that didn't resonate with me. And then eventually, at some point it did, probably maybe in the past 10 years, 8 to 10 years or so. And it just kind of gotten more and more into them as time went on. And I just appreciate so much about this band that you have four uniquely talented musicians that they're all songwriters, they're all vocalists. Mastodon has so many great songs that it's kind of like in the same sense of the Beatles or Zeppelin or one of these bands where you had different musical entities that were songwriters themselves that brought their own music in, and they Kiss is another band that did that, just not at a as technical a level, obviously. And you have, here's a Brent song, here's a Troy song, here's a Bill song, whatever. And Brent very much had a sound and a big part of that. And I've seen, every single comment that's come out since, not every single comment that's come out, but I've seen every different type of comment that's come out since he left the band that ranges from this band should hang it up, they're going to be nothing without him, to he hasn't contributed in the last couple albums, so this is like smooth sailing, it's not even going to matter, and everything in between. I can't speak on that. I know that there are Brent songs throughout the years that I love. I know that I love watching the guy live. I know that he is a very unique individual, and I think that Mastodon, maybe not instantly, and maybe not instantly in the live setting, but I think once their next studio album comes out, I think you'll notice his presence. I think not being there, I think it'll have a different feel. I'm not going to speculate on if they'll continue with Ben Eller, who they've gotten to fill in on their first concert since Brent had left, and the consensus on that was most people were happy with it, of that choice. So who knows if that'll be the choice, or because since that, there's also been statements from the band it's going to be hard to replace Brent and all this, so maybe they're still searching, or maybe they've got another person in mind already ready to go. They're just not ready to release it. But all that being said, I think it'll be noticeable, but I think Mastodon, just like many other bands that have member changes, even if it's a member that contributed a lot, I think that Mastodon will be fine moving forward. That's just my indication. That's just my guess. How about that? And that's just kind of where I'm going to leave it. Okay, so recently Dave Mustaine made this statement. By the time you're hearing this episode, kind of like I said about the Frank Ferrer thing, this isn't super timely, but this is also a topic that is kind of irrelevant to time at this point, because it's not, breaking news or anything. But Dave Mustaine, in an interview that came out a little over a week ago, he made a statement about nu metal that has, kind of like I said with the Brent Ferguson thing, drawn every response imaginable. I've seen people saying, he's exactly right. I've seen people saying he's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and I've seen everything in between. Dave Mustaine, for those of you who are listening to this, should be well aware that the man has never had an issue with saying what's on his mind. Is he right? Half the time, yeah. Half the time, no, probably. I guess that all depends on if you're like a delusional fan that believes everything someone says, or if you just have the same mindset as someone. I don't know. But I feel like most people in these situations, I agree with what they say sometimes and don't with them the other times, because I know how to think for myself, I guess. It's just kind of like people that blindly follow certain politicians over the past 10 to 15 years. It's just kind of baffling to me that you devote everything to one narrative instead of, really thinking about something. And Mustaine, to his credit, stands on, what he thinks and will just say it. But at other times that backfires, because I feel like what he said about nu metal was way, way, way too generalized. And I used to do this, a long time ago, when I would, like anyone does, when they make an argument like, oh, Five Finger Death Punch sucks. Okay, well, why? Well, I heard that song, blah, 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 I didn't like it. Okay, well, what other songs do you not like? Well, you don't know because you really heard one song and didn't like it. And a lot of times, maybe that's a good indication, but you can't blanketly say an entire band sucks because you heard one song that wasn't to your liking. You haven't heard their other 67 songs, you've never seen them live, blah, blah, blah. I've seen bands live that I didn't like at all after having heard many other songs, and it changed my mind. So there's a million different things that can go into a thought process. But I think way too many people just blanket things way too much. How about that? But with that being said, I'll give you the actual quote that Dave Mustaine said about nu metal. And he said, and I quote, "There was a period in 2000 where we had these bands called, I think it was, quote, nu metal. And they didn't do any solos. Well, why didn't they do any solos? They couldn't do solos. And thank God that genre went away. People started to learn how to do solos. I would say if you're in a nu metal band, you probably would be challenged even playing Johnny Be Good, the 1958 rock and roll classic by Chuck Berry. So I'm glad that went away." End quote. Okay, so there's a lot that can be said there. First off, one of the poster children bands of nu metal is Limp Bizkit. And Limp Bizkit's guitarist is, frankly, one of the best guitarists in rock and roll. I mean, there's a million different things that you can say makes someone a great guitarist. You could be super into, tone and soul and sound, or you could be super into technicality, whatever. But I think even people that hate Limp Bizkit can recognize how good Wes Borland is. Sure, he wasn't ripping fucking Megadeth-style solos on any Limp Bizkit song. But you just basically said that if you played nu metal, you would be hard-pressed to play something simple like Johnny Be Good. So, there's the first way to generalization, right? And I'm sure that several of these bands, Disturbed, I don't know if you consider Disturbed nu metal or not, but they were around in that period. They notably didn't have solos on their early stuff, and then by the second, third, fourth album, they started playing solos. And I remember interviews where, Dan Donegan was talking about how they basically didn't because of the time period. And then once they kind of, they didn't push back against it, I guess, but once it kind of became cool, quote unquote cool, I guess the time period that Dave referenced later in his quote, they started throwing him in. But do you think he learned how to do it all of a sudden? No, this is something he always did, right? And I mean, there's so many, to me, nu metal, there is a very distinct sound that can be equated to nu metal. I mean, it's like that down-tuned sound that's got hip-hop influences. You think of bands like Linkin Park and Korn and Limp Bizkit. People throw System of a Down in there. There's so many other bands, Spineshank, Primer 55, that we could go on and on. But every single one of these bands, there are very specific bands that I think Dave Mustaine could have been referring to. But then there's a band like Soil, who I didn't really equate with nu metal, but people probably do because they came out right in the middle of that period. And they released a statement on Facebook not long after this quote from Dave Mustaine started circulating, talking about how big of Megadeth fans they were, how much fun they had during that time period, etc., and how disappointed they were hearing these comments from Dave. So apparently Soil puts themselves right in that category. Tim King is a guy that can rip a solo. He's been on this podcast before, by the way. It's been quite a while. Back in the early days, I think, probably the second year, so it's been almost 9 years ago, probably. But all that being said, I think regardless of whether you like a genre of metal or not, especially one that is, kind of routinely lambasted by people who are into more classic or more technical stuff, it's kind of like nu metal kind of became the new glam hair metal in the sense that it was the go-to thing to rip on if you were into heavier stuff or into more technical stuff or into, a specific genre that wasn't nu metal. But all that being said, I like a lot of stuff from that era. I like a lot of stuff that doesn't include guitar solos. If every single thing included the exact same shit, what's the fucking point, right? If I want to hear a great guitar solo, I can listen to any Megadeth album. So what's Dave's, big complaint about this? I know that, during that time period, I should have looked it up. I remember that they did a tour with Korn. Well, actually, now I remember they did a tour with Korn. They had Korn on tour with them before Korn broke. So I guess that's not really a good equivalent to throw in there, but I know there were some time period in there in the late 90s, early 2000s where I guarantee you Megadeth went out and had one of these bands that he is probably throwing in that category, opening up for him. And why do you take a band out opening for you on tour, especially when you're from a different time period? You have them out there to draw on an audience. So you can keep talking the shit, Dave, but I'm sure that at some points having a slight association with nu metal because of playing on a bill with someone actually benefited you, and it probably gained you a few fans through along the way as well. All right, so let me think. I don't know if there's anything else really to talk about that's kind of floating around in the world of rock. I'm sure there is. I just didn't pull up anything else to ramble on about, but I will let you know again that I don't think I let you know yet on this episode, but Brian Fair from Shadows Fall has been on this podcast before, and he'll be back on the very next episode. I recently recorded this interview with Brian. He was on here 5 years ago. He was on here right at the 5-year point in May of 2020. And so here he's going to be on here in April of 2025. So almost the exact 10-year point, but it's kind of a cool. So, but hopefully I'll have him back before the 15-year point. But Shadows Fall, I'm such a big fan of this band, so excited to get another interview with Brian out. I've also got a special episode coming up with Sprout, who, if you've followed this podcast throughout the years, Sprout is a guy that I've actually been on tour with a couple times. I did the Booze, Bars, and Guitars tours. There's 2 of them that him and Dusty Grant did. Toured the Midwest for a couple weeks, 2 different years, and I did those tours with him. He's been a part of a lot of great metal bands like King Shifter, Screaming Red Mutiny, Green Country Irate. He's got solo work that's great under Sprout the Anti-Hero. We're going to be talking about all that, and the episode might correlate with a special holiday that one could equate with Sprout, or Willie Nelson, or Matt Pike from High on Fire and Sleep. So that kind of narrows that down for you. All right, I also have an interview. I don't know. I said it on the last episode, so I'll go ahead and say it. I don't like announcing interviews before they've been recorded, but I'm going to go ahead and announce it anyway. Nige Rocket, the founding member and guitarist of Onslaught, a thrash metal band that's been around for over 30 years. We're going to be diving into all the talk about Onslaught, so that should be coming very soon as well. I've also got a couple other things scheduled and ready to go, but in the meantime, be looking out for those episodes. There's 416 episodes prior to this you can check out. Like I said earlier this week, Mitchell Gilliam from Blind Oath. Last week, Phil X from Bon Jovi. Earlier this year, Robin McCauley returned for the 5th time. The vocalist of Michael Schenker and Black Swan. So many other great things throughout the years. Glenn Hughes has been on the podcast a couple times. Frank Hannon from Tesla multiple times. Gene Simmons of Kiss. Bruce Kulick, formerly of Kiss. Jason Todd, formerly of Shinedown. R.J. Hill of Hellstorm. Greg Erpchurch of Three Doors Down. Mark Slaughter of Slaughter. Trevor Sternad of the Black Dahlia Murder. Mike Dean and Reed Mullen, both of Corrosion Conformity. LeJean Witherspoon and John Connolly of Seven Dust. David Elvison. Chris Broderick. James Lomenzo, all of Megadeth. Alex Skolnick of Testament. Vivian Campbell of Def Leppard and Dio, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, Jeff Tate of Queensryche, Tracy Guns of LA Guns, members of Junkyard, Kix, Warrant, Typo Negative, Prong, Helmet, White Zombie, Motley Crue, Whitesnake, Living Color, Leonard Skinner, John Waite, Sons of Texas, Battlecross, Overkill. The list is great and long. See, I could just set and ramble names forever. 415 times, right? Go back, check some of those episodes out at thethunderunderground.com. You can listen to everything there. You can also listen pretty much anywhere podcasts are heard. Spotify, YouTube, all that great stuff. Follow all the socials. I'm on TikTok. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I think that covers them, right? Probably something else I'm forgetting. Anytime you see a post Anytime you see anything related to Thunder Underground, just like it, comment on it, share it. That's a massive help. I've been out of t-shirts for a while. I've got a new order coming in very soon. I'll announce that once that happens. I've also got shot glasses, koozies, stickers, all that great stuff. Guitar picks, so if you ever see me out and about, hit me up for that stuff or send me an email, thethunderunderground@gmail.com, or hit me up on any of those pre-mentioned social networks. All right, once again, a huge thank you to DEB Concerts, Rocklahoma Bitches, and Sunset Tattoo. And until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.